Welcome to the Rare Earth Exchanges podcast, where power, politics, and the world's most coveted materials collide. Rare earth elements power the backbone of tomorrow's most critical technologies. With China dominating global production, the U.S. and its allies must align strategically to ensure a stable future. This urgency prompted tech entrepreneurs Daniel O'Connor and Dustin Olson to launch Rare Earth Exchanges, a news and insight platform built to equip stakeholders and decision makers with the tools and intelligence needed to reduce dependency and build prosperous resilience. Let's get into it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rare Earth Exchanges podcast. I'm your host, Dustin, joined by Daniel, my co-host, and today our special guest is Robert Bunting of Bunting Magnetics. Robert, it's a family business. You guys have been in business since the 50s?
1959.
1959, and you became the CEO in 2022.
That's correct.
So definitely a long time coming. So Robert, welcome to the show.
Glad to be
To
here.
kind of get started, I would love to hear a bit about your experience growing up in the magnetic industry as a family.
Yeah, so my grandfather came back from World War II and was outside of Detroit, had a little business cutting extruded aluminum to then make windows and doors during the housing boom. And along came another gentleman who said, "Hey, you guys have a saw. Can you cut these ferrite blocks for us?" And soon after, he and his partner realized that this magnet business was going to be a lot more profitable than windows and doors. So he and his partner could split up, and one stayed in Detroit. My grandfather moved down to Chicago. That's where my father was about 8 when they moved. Business continued to grow until 79 when we moved the main facility to Newton, Kansas, just outside of Wichita. Somehow along the way, my father convinced my pregnant mother to move down there, and just before I was born. So I was born in Kansas, grew up in the facility, went in wearing my Bunting t-shirt that said Magnet Kid on the back. Anybody who knows me from the old days still call me by my old nickname, RJ. So there's a handful of those still around, but we're now continue to grow with sites in Newton. We have 3 buildings there, a facility in Du Bois, Pennsylvania, so central Pennsylvania, and then a site Berkhamsted just outside of London, and a site Redditch just north there outside of Birmingham. But we've got magnetic separation, magnetic conveyors, magnetic cylinders for aluminum cans, and most importantly for today's discussion, we do make bonded neodymium and design and source and assemble sintered neodymium and other magnets out of the Du Bois and Berkhamsted facility.
That's awesome. So, Robert, with your family's experience, you've seen a lot, I'm sure, in this industry from probably surges to even now where there's a lot of demand for magnets, especially the neodymium magnets that you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share just a bit of your perspective of kind of what's going on today, especially in contrast to what you've grown up with? What have you
Yeah,
seen there?
and I think what we've seen is the market is definitely matured. I mentioned ferrite magnets, large blocks that are easily cut. Alnico, that was back, it's in the 60s, 70s. The birth of neodymium for a variety of uses in the technically late 90s, early 2000s, to now where you've got very high strength magnets using, you know, high technical jet milling and grain boundary diffusion to be able to get very strong miniaturized magnets. Throughout that process, as everyone probably knows here, China really took over that demand from the mining to the separation to the rest of the manufacturing, and we kind of let it go by the wayside. The big difference is now versus some of those events of late is it was maybe a bit of a disruption in supply, maybe one of the cyclical spikes in pricing. You look back to the 11 days of when the kind of fight between China and Japan occurred, which caused a lot of maybe the precursor of what we're seeing today. It eventually settled back down. So I think, one of the lines I really liked from Peter at Novian was, a 5-cent part and a $5 component in a $5 million thing. And I think that describes magnets oftentimes as was an afterthought that people could regularly source either from the US or from China. The smart ones had dual sourcing. The ones that were a little bit riskier relied solely on China. And that's probably where we're at today, is where the people that have dual source are a little safer, but it's a stress on the industry, especially when we look at the heavy rare earth restrictions, mainly surrounded dysprosium, but even China continuing to catch up and restricting the homium or some of the lighter rare earths right now is going to start to become another problem here in a couple months. So what I would say is we are in a totally new ball game. There's nothing that I think, can learn from looking back. In a perfect world, we would have slowly made this change from China dependence in the background quietly. We did it a little bit loud, a little noisy, and so we're trying to catch up and move quickly.
So, Robert, I had a question, and more, if you could help elaborate on generally magnets bonded versus sintered. And I think a lot of people don't know the difference. And,
Right.
What are the differences? What types of industries consume bonded versus sintered? Why is sintered maybe a little bit more challenging or different to produce?
Yeah. So the story on bonded fits very well with us in Du Bois, and it's Du Bois is kind of known as the powdered metal capital of the world. So you take a press, a hydraulic or a mechanical press, you've got a finely milled neodymium powder, and then you've got a mix of typically a polymer that's blended with that, and then physically pressed into a shape. Most common shapes are arcs or rings, and one of the advantages that over the years bonded has had is it does offer lower cost because of less processing, and then the ability, not to get too technical, but you can magnetize it in lots of different directions, which is a little bit different than with sintered, where you are restricted on the directions you can go. And that allows for more complex sensors and motors. And again, it's a little bit less powerful magnet from a sintered, but in a lot of motors, they have space to do it. So when you get to sintered, you've got a stronger strength and a smaller package, right? The miniaturization, it gives you a little bit more control. Yes, sir. As time's gone on, you've got the ability to handle more heat. That's been as the heavies get added. Technology has gotten better, that it has similar magnetization patterns as that can be done as bonded, but it's still a little bit more difficult in that isotropic versus non-isotropic. But I won't go too deep down that definition there.
What would be an example of an industry that consumes bonded magnets versus rare sintered magnets?
A lot of industrial motors. So very common. Major motor manufacturers would use it, as well as very small motors, so miniaturization motors. That's the most common. You see it both from power generation. You can also have it in rotary sensors, position switches. Those are where we definitely see it the most.
Just to clarify, where you see bonded at the most or sintered?
That's correct, bonded.
Okay.
So our big customers are on the bonded side, are in industrial motors, commercial motors. Think of a large fan motor or a drive motor. One of our largest bonded pieces we ever did was a generator on a large earth mover. So big pieces, but that's the type of opportunity where if space isn't the constraint, you can get the same energy out of a bonded magnet as a sintered when you have space to oversize it while keeping the price down.
But bonded are is the trade-off also size, that the sintered facilitate more miniaturization?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's cost. This is where that's a product where we're seeing a lot of movement to bring this back to the US right now, because the risk of China had scale and low cost, but now the restriction, and we're set up in Du Bois right now to be able to handle the current load, and we're expanding from capacity and facility size right now to take on more.
Is that growth coming from certain industries?
The biggest growth we're seeing is on some of the smaller high-speed motors. So you get into a lot of electronics, circuit board, things like that. That's where we're seeing right now that's the biggest risk when we talk about the potential of the actuality of attempting to totally desource from any China-produced component.
So basically, these would be tier 2 suppliers that are making motors that supply maybe electronics or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. The fan example, we've seen a lot of inquiries on fans that go into a variety of
Yeah.
commercial buildings, warehouses, everything surrounding data storage right now. There's a lot of that discussion about, because they're just big heat generators, right? So you got to keep them down to be cool to perform at
And
higher
just
levels.
and just to get into the science a little bit, or the engineering. So the way a bonded magnet, what does it do to keep it cooler?
It's just gonna be used in the actual motor driving, say, a fan. Nothing specific to the magnet.
Okay. So it's the magnets being used to drive the fan, which
Right.
can cool it
Correct.
down.
Correct.
Okay. Now, obviously first of all, we have to, it's very impressive. It's an American family owned company. It's going on for over 60 years. So that's amazing. That's something to be celebrated by itself.
Thank you. I'm reminded now that I'm running the show how every single day that keeping the doors open, keeping product going out the door, and keeping people employed is a big accomplishment.
It's a huge accomplishment. What's your take on this whole bigger picture? The new rules are coming in that no magnets can have Chinese inputs. Those magnets, the sintered magnets that need the heavy rare earth doping,
Yep.
those regulations are a little bit ahead of where the market is, actually. Would you agree with that?
I think that's fair. Even if you set aside that the whole idea of mind to magnet rings easily off the tongue, right? But it's difficult. I mean, it's a wonderful thing that we've got Mountain Pass producing. MP's done a great job of making that mine produce, and they're taking on the big work of separating out those light rare earths that mine is full of. It's
Yeah.
great that they're focusing on the samarium coming out of that mine as well. Yeah, you get down to making blocks is not easy. Sintering is something we can do in the US, but the separation and making those blocks is tough stuff. So when we get to, what we ultimately need a finished product magnet to be able to meet the demand, you're right that, the dosing of days gone by with dysprosium, now really pushes us to the grain boundary diffusion GBD. Positive of that is we're able to use less of it. The negative is you still need a lot of dysprosium. We have to go through a lot of engineering work to possibly re-engineer these magnets to use less dysprosium, because it's
Right.
very common in the industry to use far too much.
Right.
But Bunting's working on a project where we want to focus on that final step of design and fabrication, working with block producers in the US to take their blocks and then cut those to size, especially for that defense work that we're going to so desperately need, just off the demand of ammunitions that we're going through right now, and obviously with the DFARS requirements coming very quickly around the corner.
Right. So, if you look at, so again, we're covering the supply chain, so upstream, midstream, downstream.
Yes, sir.
If you look at the bunting and you're part of it, making the magnets, do you do the metallization from oxide to metals, or do you work with a third party to do that?
Yeah, that's where with the bonded product we're able to buy the what's called the B powder, and either bond it with the polymer in house, or we work with one of the large suppliers to buy that actually ready to go. So you don't have the metallization requirements that you do on the sintered product.
Right.
That is a tough thing. I've spent enough time in China to see that metallization that to the jet milling. There is a lot of steps in there. It's I'm sure you guys know this, but if you want to learn about it, that 60 minutes piece on MP materials really addresses it well. That the mining part is the easiest part. Separation is by far the hardest.
Yeah.
Metallization is not easy. The engineering is not easy, and then you still have to get to the slicing and the grinding and the magnetization, most likely along with the grain boundary diffusion. That it's steps on steps on steps of difficulty.
And
So I
go ahead.
had just talking about the supply chain, and so some things you can do in house, like you're just saying.
Yep.
Other things you're trying to outsource. I'd be curious just to know just a bit more what your choke points are uh, in the supply chain. Like where do you guys
You know,
struggle?
right now, because we do source still quite a bit of magnets from China, we're still struggling on when a very much commercial product should be released by MOFCOM. We've got all the backup to say that it isn't defense or aerospace related, and that's still coming out, and that restrictions are only getting stronger. I'm hoping for the best, with the Trump Xi meeting coming up soon. I'm also hoping that, the reality of all these other areas where we're kind of poking the bear that's known as China, whether it's Venezuela or Iran, that I think we need to hopefully recognize the repercussions of if they continue to weaponize rare earths in the short run, what a dangerous position we are from commercial to aerospace to defense. That's the biggest struggle. I mentioned our Project Walker project of attempting to move forward with a fabrication site, and that's going to be a great demand for the defense industry, but still we would be reliant on those companies like MP Materials and EVAC and Novian to produce block. And I know they're going to have their hands full. You talk about the samarium cobalt a little bit, and the guys at the Mag group, and specifically in the EEC site in Pennsylvania, as a country, we need them to keep producing that samarium cobalt so that they can supply the Defense Department right now as best they can.
Do you all get involved with those types of magnets?
We did. I mean, we did a lot. That's been probably the toughest conversations to have with people. We provide a great deal of magnets for industrial baking lines. So they go through the oven, and those are samarium. Absolutely nothing to do with defense, but samarium has really been all but entirely cut off by China to both the US and the UK and in the EU.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there any, from your standpoint, are there any alternatives for samarium that could be accessed?
The short run, can you have some creative design work and go back to, if it's temperature demand, can you use a cup style magnet, an assembly style magnet with ferrite? That's an option for holding or sensors. The other would be eventually, I believe, that MP is going to be able to separate out the samarium that is situated in MP at Mountain Pass. Yeah, but we still then are reliant on the cobalt, which is most likely coming from Northern Africa, where the Golden Road projects have a pretty good stronghold on that as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point.
We work every day to try and work with customers to re-engineer projects. That's limiting the amount of heavy rare earths that their magnet is spec'd in, to looking at a samarium cobalt and saying, do you really need all the characteristics of that magnet, or can we substitute it?
Interesting.
Not a good answer, to be honest with you. That's probably the reality. Fingers crossed for MP.
So so if we look at Bunting, where are the high growth areas right now? What vertical industries or sectors are you interfacing with more nowadays, or let's say since the start of the year?
It continues to be anyone who is fully reliant on China for typically heavy rare earths, and that struggle to either get licenses for light rare earths or to substitute heavy rare earths for something else. It's hard to tell people. We get panics. Your dollar magnet is going to shut down my skid steer line. We're going to try and do all we can, but we can't make promises. Seeing that growth, obviously, in the bonded neodymium growth, because customers are recognizing that there is a source domestically that we can provide, versus them, currently sourcing it from China, where we can say we have a stable source right now. And we're also seeing a big demand right now for our MagVault program, which is holding higher levels of inventory 2 and 3 years, which, typically from an inventory management side of things for many larger corporations would be 2 to 3 years would be a fireable offense. And the smart ones right now are taking all that they can. If we can get it out of China, it at least gives them a buffer to when the domestic production is up and running.
Makes sense. We've had some experts tell us that, let's just say China would lock down their supply, not even these licenses anymore. They would just, then we would have to go back, because of the state that we are in with the supply chain bottlenecks and gaps. We would have to go back to previous designs. So we would move heavier gadgets or products or motors or even missiles.
Yep.
Is that a fair sort of gross summary of what would happen?
I think it's pretty accurate, especially if you have something that has the coercivity or temperature demands. I think that's absolutely the case. There are a lot of times where these magnets have just been over designed. One particular higher grade got applied and waterfall down to other applications where it didn't need it. My simple example is, the magnets that you have in the engine bay. If you pick those same magnets to run the motor in your driver's seat adjustment, those don't need to be the same magnets, right? So do a little bit of work to change the application. But I agree on high temperature and the coercivity demands. You would be going back to the opposite of the miniaturization process that we saw for the last decade.
Do you see, the American consumer, whether it's business, business to business, ultimately consumer, do you feel like that Americans are ready to do that if they had to?
I don't even think most Americans know that they have probably within my arm's reach of my desk, probably 10 magnets. I think that's the biggest struggle here when we talk about it is you'd say, what's the big deal?
Right.
So what would you say is the big deal?
Boy, I think doing all we can to support anyone right now that's trying to be involved in the process of. I said I don't love the term mine to magnet, but that's reality, which is we have the high producing mine for the lights in Mountain Pass. We've got companies that are willing to work on the separation, which is not easy. You've got the companies, whether I mentioned MP, Novian, EVAC, USA Rare Earth talks about it, getting block production and getting the other gap here is in getting the right block production. China has it's a bad joke, but the Chinese restaurants that have 30 different numbers on their menu, that's about what the offerings are when a magnet motor designer goes to China, and we're going to have to hope for maybe 10. Maybe 12 in the US. And so that redesign is going to be really key. And ultimately, all the way down to recognizing that we need lots of kids to go to engineering school right now for whether it's metallurgy or mining or magnet design. Right now, if you were graduating high school, I would say you could have a fascinating career going into either three of those areas. It's basically a wild west right now of new things happening. I hope that in the US, we're able to, with technology, catch up, but it's going to take a couple of years. Even at Bunting, we are continuing to hire more applications engineers, salespeople, mechanical engineers because of the increased demand. I think you can't always say that in a lot of industries, so you're in a fabulous spot. The entire process is what's got to be addressed, not just the blocks.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So what right now, if you looked at your business, just so that viewers can get a sense of if you might be a good partner for them, sort of, do you have any top verticals, or industry, number one? And number two, what's the balance between bonded versus sintered?
Yeah.
Versus other ferrite or what have you?
One of the big advantages of our business, going back to when my grandfather was running it, is we've always been diversified. We've had ferrite, alnico, all the grades of rare earth. We've had those available. We've had them in stock. That we've been able to design those and be able to source them to our equipment division that goes everything from food production to plastic recycling to mining to we make high precision assemblies for printing aluminum cans. And I would say that's still to this day that we're always going to be diversified. Capacity wise, right now in bonded, we have capacity, but we're also at the same time continue to invest in more presses and capacity. You're always going to have a bigger demand for sintered. We talked about the capabilities that they have are always going to far outperform bonded, but there's a good spot for both. Neither one of them are right. Neither one of them are wrong.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, where we're at in the United States, I mean, it's just, just being pragmatic, you've got to make do with what the supply chain will give you.
Yeah. And there's good things happening, being with our sites in England, there's been pushes for recycling of magnets, which I think is a good opportunity. I think the biggest focus there would be, with Birmingham University focusing on that. I'd love to think that they would just focus on the dysprosium because older magnets, don't have the GBD process. They've got the higher percentage of dysprosium, but there's good things happening all over the industry wherever you look.
Yeah.
Speaking of good things happening, we're seeing a lot of cash flow being injected into the industry right now.
Absolutely.
And some of it's serious, some of it is opportunistic.
Yeah.
From your perspective, how do you distinguish, I guess, a company that is building something real or not, like writing the narrative to partner with or to get supply from? Curious to get your thoughts on that.
What I would say was look to the companies that have been doing it the longest. And They're a competitor of ours, but, Dexter, that's part of Permag now. They've been doing it for a long time. Ovian as a supplier, they were really the first domestic block producer. They're reliably, you've got EVAC in South Carolina, part of the Vacuumschmelz group. They know what they're doing. They were just able to take what they knew in Germany and set up shop in South Carolina. We've been doing it since '59. This is nothing new. Even if we're going back to sourcing it from China, we've had boots on the ground for 30 years. It's having people that have the resources and the knowledge. One of the hardest things going forward is going to be that knowledge, that engineering skill. So the people that you want to work with, make sure that they're not new to it. I think I said MP is going to get there because they've got a good mix of private and public funding, and they've got the mind. Ovian will be supportive of because they've been doing it, and you can't ignore that. And obviously, EVAC is able to take what they know in Germany and move it right over. We're hoping to take the idea that we essentially started our business cutting magnets to taking that and being able to source blocks from those domestic sources and cut the neomagnets, the rare earth magnets to what customers need. It's going to be the expertise. That's one of the trickiest things in all this. And that's why I mentioned the kids going to school. Go to school right now for applications engineer, whether it's mining or specifically in physics and magnets, because you have one heck of a career in front of you.
I was going to ask you, what's the company size now? Like, are you like 50 to 100? Just general employee size, 200. Like, what's your?
Yeah, we have between the 4 facilities just under 250 employees.
Okay, great. So you're at 250.
Yeah.
And what, like, from your standpoint for expansion, are you all looking for investment, or are you going to just grow it organically, or like what's your strategy there?
I'm working right now we're very much working for state and local and some federal assistance to continue to expand. We're always open to partnerships. We've been pretty proud, debt free for almost 35 years. My dad, who passed away last year, lived a little bit more like the greatest generation on the money under the bed, but we also grew the business quite a bit. So I can't argue with that. But as we look at these opportunities, especially on the fabrication side, I think we're going to have to be open to partnering. But I do really think this is where the federal government's got to step in and make sure that more companies have the backing to be able to set this supply chain up so that it's stable, so that you don't have a company that's been in existence for a couple of months that then falls to pieces and leaves customers hanging out to dry. I think that's where, whether it's the Defense Department or Commerce or where continuing to fund the industry has got to be key.
Right. And again, when you say fund the industry, you mean like through their loans and various capital programs?
I do. I mean, I do think grants to companies that are willing to expand is a big portion of it. But I think the federally backed loans obviously is great. You see in other areas, you see like JP Morgan having their fund where they're specifically looking at rare earths. We need more of those. There's been some discussions and publications, I think today, again in Bloomberg, about the rare earth vault. Take that idea and we need more of it. That article this morning talked about the cost of just, I think it's 90 days worth of product. And when I look at that, I kind of laugh because that's not nearly enough. So whether it's vault, whether it's loans, whether it's grants, this is pretty critical. I think every magnet manufacturer's got a story back in COVID where their one magnet, if they didn't get it in, was going to shut down a major production line. I think you take that now and you can just multiply that by the risk we'd be seeing in the next couple months.
For sure. Dustin, do you I may have one or two questions. You want to go next?
Yeah. So your family has been in the business long enough to have watched previous rare earth crises go on. So 2010, 2011, come and go without the West building out any lasting alternatives.
Yeah.
What makes you believe this time, this momentum that we're seeing will be sustained, if at all?
When I look at this, the difference is I've been going to China now for 10 years, and up until I would honestly say up until the beginning of last year, 25, I very much saw a cooperative nature between the U.S. and China. What was good for their growth was good for our growth, and so this past, let's call it 11 months, 13 months, has been the first time where I've definitely seen that the idea changed. I think China is not going to allow magnet technology, and they're not going to allow people out. If we want to have a supply chain in place to fund the things we have, whether it's a car, whether it's a missile, whether it's a phone, we're going to have to create the supply chain on our own, and we're going to have to do it really quickly. I think we could have learned a lot from 2011 between China and Japan, but I think unfortunately, when you look at our news cycle, whether it was the 24-hour news or now the expiration of an Instagram story, we quickly forget about things like that and move on.
So true. Short memory span.
It's hard, it's the reality is, I think we don't have a choice. That's why I say it, as a nation, the federal government needs to support it, and those within the magnet industry need to continue to support each other, because I think when one of us wins, we all win.
Totally agree. And we've shared that a lot here on the show as well.
Right.
It's going to take a global effort. Like we're all dependent on each other. And if we can just play nice in that way, that would be great.
Yeah.
One last question for myself here is, you talk about going to China, you've got offices abroad in the United States. And as CEO, how do you manage the tensions that exist between different countries and managing I guess kind of expectations between cultures and country policies, things like that?
You try and understand why. I think I learned it when I took over CEO, and I thought that, the US and the UK were so different in the way, employment laws and things like that. And you realize we're all about the same. You go to China and you meet the people, and they want to do a good job. They want to have pride. They want to create something. And I think when I look at our employees at all four sites, people want to show up. They want to be a part of something. They want to be successful. If you have an organization with plenty of good people, it's a lot easier for me, because I just point the finger and say, what do you think? What do you want to do? And then give them the support to do it. In different scenarios, I have to play a different role. At times, I've had folks find me on LinkedIn. I don't hide my email address, and they've been frustrated. And I will always respond to say, I'm sorry. I know how bad the scenario is. We're going to work hard to help you out, but I also need you to understand reality, that the situation we're in isn't going to get any better. So we're going to help you the best to try and do redesigns or change your sourcing. The way that you did business of just in time for 20 years, is gone by the wayside.
That's great. And sounds like great leadership too.
I try. I think that's when you look at what a CEO does, is leadership is not easy, because you can never define it, but it's always a lot easier when you have good people around you.
How are you different? I'm curious to know. I think it started with your grandfather or
Yes, sir.
father?
My grandfather.
So if you compare your grandfather, father, and you, similar sort of leadership style, different? Could you just share more about how that's evolved?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I also correct people. It was my grandfather and my grandmother who started it.
Okay.
He would always appreciate that. So they worked together to start the business. He was an entrepreneur, but I enjoyed, I think, the life of coming back as a Navy vet and turning his life into something, and having 4 kids and their grandkids. And I think he got to a point where he was successful and felt happy. And I think that's where family businesses allow for the next person to come take in. My dad was, at his heart, a sales leader, a sales driver. He would say that was his dream job, right? Constantly walking around the building and asking about where quotes are at or projects are at. I think that I'm a little bit different, that I'm a little bit more aggressive. I worked hard to get to this spot. I think that, the curse of third generation is alive. I think also, when I go to some family business forums, I always say the second generation has to give in a little bit more. But I think that fighting to stay in the business and stay relevant and keep my part while my dad was still active kind of has molded me into the same thing now, of fighting for growth, continuing to get better, new opportunities, try and look at what the company's going to look like in 10 years. I think that's always got to be thinking. So many times in strategy, say, how do you know what's going to be happening in 10 years? Well, reality is you got to put a plan in place and make it happen, not just wait.
Totally. %.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, it was great having you here on the show with us and sharing a bit about your family history, but also your perspective of the industry as it is today. We like to ask everyone, where can others find you so they can reach out? It sounds like LinkedIn's a pretty open place.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere else?
LinkedIn is, you can find my email. So if you want to add me to spam, go right ahead. But we've got our two websites, buntingmagnetics.com and magnetapplications.com. So that separates us into the equipment side of the business and the magnet side of the business. But I'm out there. I do want to turn this and say thanks to you guys. I think the more press, the more education that comes out about magnets, the better. This has been an area where, as we said, I don't think it ever really got talked about. All of a sudden, I went from a job that was, yeah, he works at a magnet company to, well, you're in the rare earths, you mean? You're in the neodymium. People saying the words that never were out there. So it's good and bad to have a little bit of publicity.
Yeah. Yes, we're glad that you're willing to be here to share that, and we hope to have you again on the show to get an update
Great.
on how things progress.
Great.
We think you're primed for a lot of success ahead.
Thank you.
Definitely.